we're live. We're just waiting, ready for 8 o'clock. My helper is going to tell me when we're ready to go. This is where we are. Some of our machinery. But give you a little pre-show. We were hoping for a nice sunny evening, but we'll have to make do with what we've got. Still quite nice. I think people are enjoying these Cambridgeshire views. You can hear the birds. Okay, so it's 8 o'clock and we are your final virtual farm tour of the evening of the Open Farm Sunday Live. So good evening everybody, I'm Tom Mead and we are in Cambridgeshire for the last tour of the evening. What a fantastic day it's been. I've really enjoyed watching all the farms up and down the country and seen far more of them than would have done if it was actually visiting all of them, so that's been absolutely fantastic. I was due to be hosting my first Open Farm Sunday this year, but unfortunately that couldn't go ahead, so we're really excited about doing this. So as I said, we're an arable farm in Cambridgeshire and we're hoping to show you around some of the crops we grow, some of the machinery used, some of the technology, and I have a helper here with me this evening as well. Alice Midmer is going to be picking me up on anything that I forget and making sure that we cover everything. Please ask questions on the chat function and we'll try and pick those up as we go along as well. So we've been farming here, not me personally, but since about 1925, so we've got quite a long history of farming and various different things over the years. We're now completely an arable farm, but we have had pigs and other livestock in the past. So let me walk you through some of the crops that we grow on the farm. In preparation for hosting, I had planted some, how does this turn around now? And there, we're ready. So I had planted some crops in plots because our main farm is at the other end of the village from where we are. So here we have about 25 acres surrounding the farm, and the main part of the field was sugar beets. So we thought we'd plant some different crops so as people visiting could see. So we're grateful that we're still getting to use these. So all of these crops were actually not planted until the spring. So they're not looking particularly special, and thankfully my main field crops are looking a bit better than this. But just an example, and that'll also highlight the difference in when we don't give crops any attention to detail at all and when we do. So our first crop here are winter beans. So you can see these ones that were planted in the spring are quite short. They should really be planted in October, and if you look at this plant here, this is what they should look like, but we'll come back to a little bit more of those in a minute. We've also got some oats, some peas and some rather poor looking wheat, but we'll show you how it should look. So we'll come back through those crops in a minute. The main crop we grow on the farm is wheat. Now that is planted in October ideally. Lots of people struggled with that this year to get it planted in October because it was so wet. I'm sure you've heard quite a lot about the weather today and the challenges that that's made. So I'm just going to pass you over to Alice and I'll do, as I say, our main crop of wheat and the oats would be planted in October. Here we have some of the seed. So this is wheat seed, and it's exactly the same as what we harvest, but that's what we plant back in the ground. And we would plant in October about 200 kilos of that per hectare across the field. And with the hope that by the time we harvest those 200 kilos of seed have turned into 10,000 or 10 tonnes a hectare. That's really our target for what we're aiming for. So, I mean, farming's easy, right? That seems pretty simple. So this is a new machine we've got on the farm, but this is what we call a drill, and that's how we plant our crops in the ground. So we load crops up into here, into this hopper, which we call the tank. This fan here blows air up, and it's metered out of a system which is all electronically controlled. Flows down these pipes and into down here and onto these bits which are called coulters. Now, previous to this operation, we've prepared the soil, and what we're really looking for is some nice friable soil, obviously free from weeds, but we want a nice environment. So if you imagine that seed's put in there and that's pressed in, that's going to be a perfect environment for that to grow. So that all seems pretty simple. This drill is quite good because it actually it's a new drill, and if our soil conditions are right and we've got good soil health, we can drill direct without any pre-cultivation for this. So that's really good. It saves on fuel and saves us a lot of time too. So that's basically how we plant our crops. So as I say, that seems pretty simple. So let's go over to the wheat and talk a little bit more about some of the challenges that we might actually face during the year, and we'll come back down to these crops.
Had a question from someone, Tom. What's your best yielding crop on the farm?
I think that depends on the year, and we'll talk a bit more about crop rotations in a minute. Some crops prefer different seasons, and different climatic conditions will suit different crops. So that's why it's important to have a range of different crops as well. This is our wheat here that was planted in the spring. You can see that's looking not particularly tall or big, whereas this is something that was planted in October and has had the full treatment to make sure we've got a good crop here. So effectively, we heard probably a lot today about how dry it's been, but the other key important thing about growing all crops is basically we're harvesting sunlight. So these leaves are like little solar panels, really, taking in the sun's rays. And it's important for us to obviously have lots of them, a nice biomass of crop. And to do that, we apply fertiliser. So these crops haven't had any fertiliser applied. You can see they're looking a little bit small. So this is some artificial fertiliser, and in here it's a blend of nitrogen, phosphate and potash and some sulphur. And we can blend various different mixes of fertiliser, because each crop might need a different quantity and different amounts of different products. So we don't just go and blanket apply that without any testing before. So what we actually do is take a soil test. So we send a sample of soil away to a laboratory where it's analysed, and then that tells us what level of nutrients we've got in each of our fields. We can then use that information to decide how much fertiliser we put on our crops. It also gives us a level of organic matter here, which has also, I think, been picked up quite a lot today. And we apply some organic fertilisers, manure to our fields, and a high level of organic matter really helps the soil to hold on to some moisture, which has obviously been critical in the times that we've had recently, where we've gone from very wet periods and then incredibly dry times. So it's important that we have a high organic matter soil to try and hold on to as much of that moisture as possible.
Does anyone help you make those decisions, Tom?
So as part of that, we have a crop doctor, or what we call an agronomist, and they will help advise us on fertiliser decisions, but also general crop health. So we do need to make sure, as I mentioned earlier, that some of these leaves here, they need to harvest sunlight. So if they get disease, that's going to make them less able to harvest sunlight, because they're going to lose some of their green leaf area and have less area to photosynthesize through. So we assess the crops through the year, or through the growing season, to see whether they've got any disease on them and whether we need to treat them. And this is looking pretty clean at the moment. There is a little bit of mildew at the bottom here. We just really want to protect these top leaves, because they're the ones that are intercepting the sunlight. So that's our wheat crop. So I missed anything on that, Alice? And most importantly, this is what it goes into. A little bit while we're on wheat, about varieties. There's different varieties of wheat. We like to try and produce bread making wheat, because it's very high quality and a decent price. So that's good for us to make a profit, which is very important. There's different varieties of wheat that are suitable for different things. Some are better for making cereal, some are better for making biscuits, and some go to animal feed. So it's a whole range of different things. We get advice on those through various different people as well. There's every farmer that produces a ton of wheat pays a levy to the AHDB, which is the Agricultural and Horticultural Development Board, and they do trials and tests on different varieties and see which ones are best for us to grow. And also some varieties are naturally more resistant, so that means if they're resistant to some diseases, that means we don't have to apply as much chemical or fungicides to protect those leaves. So we're using lots of different tools to try and grow a good healthy crop. And this is the bit we're after, these ears, which is where the wheat is. You'll see the grains there just forming, which when they're dried out in about another 6 weeks time will look like that and be ready to harvest.
Couple of questions, Tom. How many seeds do you plant per square metre?
So about 400 seeds per square metre. Very roughly, that can change depending on the time of year, but in October that's where we'd be.
We've got quite a provocative question. How much yield do you think you've lost because of the lack of rain?
Various, depends across the farm. Some of it where we've got more moisture retentive soils, not a lot. Some where we've got gravel, 30-40% at the moment.
Okay.
But I'm optimistic, and we'll come back to that. Another crop we grow on the farm, peas. You can see here, these, as long as they're good enough quality, will go into mushy peas and be into mushy peas or into canned peas. They're really high in protein, so a great crop. Also, you know, if they fail for human consumption, then they might end up in animal feed, but we really don't want that. But you can see here, this is some I pulled up earlier out the field. Got some there with flowers on and the pods just forming. So these really need a rain now because they're quite stunted, and it's just because of the dry conditions. They would normally be a bit taller than that. But the key thing now is there's quite a lot of actual peas in there, but we need the rain to be able to fill those out. Oats we grow on the farm as well. We haven't actually got any this year, just because we've grown quite a lot, and the way that our crop rotation works, we've grown different crops around the farm. We didn't have a suitable site for that this year. But our oats, and they come into this, you know, lovely breakfast cereal or go into cereal bars, and then, you know, really good crop and have done very well on our farm. And also take minimal inputs, so that's quite good. When I talk about inputs, it's minimal amounts of fertiliser and are not particularly susceptible for quite a lot of diseases, so that's really good. And then our other crop here is a crop of winter beans, which these are some that come in the field, so you can see they flower and then start to get pods, and you'll see I've got one open here. The pods just starting to form there with beans in, which you can see the size of those to the size of some of these ones that we've harvested. They've got quite a bit of growing to do, but they will hopefully, if they can get enough moisture, keep growing and end up like those. They either end up for human consumption, quite a lot get exported to Egypt, and if not, they'll go to animal feed, and they're an absolute, you know, they're like rocket fuel for animal feed, very high in protein, so good for that. Another thing to talk about with peas and beans, being a different type of crop, is that they actually fix nitrogen into the soil. So that's really good, because that's actually putting nitrogen back into the soil, and then when we grow our following wheat crop, we can reduce the amount of nitrogen we need to put on the crop. So that's a plus side to peas and beans, and that's why we have a rotation of different crops. That breaks the cycle of any diseases of any particular crop by because different diseases are on different crops. So by growing different ones, that keeps our soil healthy and hopefully minimises the amount of products we have to put on our crops.
Because we had a question, why don't you just grow the most profitable crop? Why rotate them? So would that be the main reason?
That's the main reason, yeah. You know, you can't farm by looking at a spreadsheet thinking that's the most profitable crop. You've got to have a good rotation to keep everything in tune and everything in balance. It's kind of nature, isn't it? So.
Also, do you think we should eat more beans in the UK?
I think we should. I think they're fantastic homegrown protein, both peas and beans, and we should definitely be looking at how we can use those more in food products rather than in importing protein.
Great, Mead's farm beans coming near you.
The final crop I didn't mention is we also grow some winter barley. This is some of our winter barley that I took out the field today. So this is one of the earliest crops on the farm to harvest, and this will mainly go for animal feed.
So with your cereals, Tom, how do you know when they're ready to harvest?
So it's quite an important time of year. They've got to be dry enough to harvest, so you can see the wheat that we showed you there with the ear, that'll have to dry out, and we can't physically harvest those if they're too wet. So before we can go to harvest them, we need to test the moisture level, because we need to be able to store those safely. So we use this machine here, which is our moisture meter. So we pour some crop. We have to harvest a small area of crop to see to get that sample. We put it into this machine, and then we press wheat, and we press for it to test the moisture content. Now that's important, because if crops are too wet, they would go off in store, and obviously we need crops all the way through the year. We don't just want crops at harvest time. We need to be able to store them up and to supply them to processors throughout the whole year.
So what number are you looking for on this?
We're looking for 15%. And can you see this? We're on 13.5, so we're good to go, which is really exciting. when you're a farmer, because that's what you want. You want to be able, your crop to be dry enough and to really get on with harvesting straight away.
So what do you use to harvest them?
So we use our combine harvester to harvest them, which we've got here. Also at this point, it's just worth saying that you know, farmers are rushing around in harvest time, and you see people working late at night. When these crops get ripe and get ready to harvest to their optimum, their peak time, it's a very short window that these crops are ready. And if the weather changes when they're ready, we can lose quality literally in a matter of a couple of days. So when the crop's like that and it's ready to harvest and it's dry enough, it's really key, because if we don't harvest that in time, our crop can go from being bread making quality, which is worth a premium, to being a feed crop. And also then, you know, the producers that are making that bread haven't got that quality of crop to make into loaves of bread, which ultimately their customers and our customers wouldn't be happy with that. So,
I've just got a couple of questions. Quite an insightful one. What's your favourite crop to grow on the farm in terms of sustainability and whole farm planning, not just profit?
I really like peas because of the fact they're fixing nitrogen. It's then helping our following crop. They're really good for soil health, both peas and beans, but you know, each crop has its challenges, and that's why we need a good rotation.
You've also got lovely flowers.
They are. I've got lovely flowers, yeah. Can you hear me okay? So we've just looked through the combine. So it starts up here. So this is what we call the cutter bar, for obvious reasons. It's got very, very sharp knives down here that cut the base of the crop. This bit here called the reel pulls it into the harvester, and then along this bit here pulls all the crop to the middle of the machine and takes it up into the harvester. See it? The crop then gets taken up into the machine, and the best way I think to describe it is it's a bit like a giant washing machine. There's a huge cylinder in there that spins around really, really fast, separates the grain, which is in the ear at the top of the plant, from the straw, from the stem at the base. So that goes through. Shall I just walk through the rest of this? So you can see here, I've just got one of the guards up so you can actually see the combines. This is powered by a rather large engine. There's lots here that once the crop's gone through the big cylinder, or you know, washing machine, however you'd like to call it, that crop is still all mixed up together. So it goes across the sieve, and that sieve is shaking through the machine. That separates out the grain from the straw, and the straw travels to the back of the machine here. And then we've got two options then. We can use this here and we can chop that straw and spread we can spread that on the fields, which is really good because that actually puts organic matter back into the soil and helps our following crops and our soil health. So we talked about organic matter earlier. Or we can change it to put out this stuff, which is straw, which is then used for animal bedding, or if it's really good quality like this, animals like to eat it too. So we've got two options there, and we can assess whether we think our field is able to sustain taking all of that crop off. So shall we have a little look inside? So just going up the steps here. So it's actually better this tour than if you were here on like actual Open Farm Sunday, because we probably wouldn't let everybody come up into the combine. So we can see here, what I forgot to mention is once that crop is separated and the grain goes up, it goes into what we call the tank, which is behind me here. Can't actually see, it's quite dry, quite dark, but that tank fills up with grain. So I think what we might do is just turn it on, and we'll do a live combine demonstration as long as you can hear me. So there's lots of cool stuff in here. So you can see the reel at the front here and all the cutter bars. So we've got fantastic views as we can see all that crop. And then what we have is all of our main controls here on a joystick, so we can lift the front and adjust everything as we're going along. For our different crops, we can come onto here and we can select a different crop. So we can select wheat, and everything on the combine changes automatically to get the settings right for different crops, because different crops need different settings. So we've got all that here, and everything that works. We will, and then this is the other item here, which is really cool, a bit of technology. This is a yield meter. So this has got a satellite receiver on the top of the combine, and that knows exactly where we are across the field. and that is plotting the yield across the field, so we can use that information then the following years to see whether we need to apply more fertiliser to an individual plot, and we can variable rate apply different products to the fields depending on how much we've taken off that field last year. It's a bit like a human, you know, if a human's running a marathon, it needs a lot more food. It's a bit like if we get a 12-ton crop, that soil where we've taken that 12-ton crop might need a lot more food to sustain the following crop, because it's depleted that soil of nutrients. So that's inside the combine. This combine is also uses about 600 litres of fuel on a good day, so it's important, and I say about those settings, that when we do set it up, we're getting the maximum out of the machines as we're harvesting as much crop as possible. I mean, crucially, the other key thing is it's got a fridge underneath this seat, which is just perfect for your lunchbox and for any cold drinks, so that keeps us going through the day. That's key. It's got the manuals in there, but normally it's got other treats. So that's our combine. I'll show you up here. There's actually a grain. This is where the grain goes, and then this thing here called the spout. When we've got a full tank, we have a trailer comes across underneath the combine and takes that back to the store. So that's our cereal crops. Should we go and have a look at some other ones?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. Your combine looks very expensive and quite complicated. Why don't you use a cheaper or easier looking machine? Or how much does your combine cost?
I mean, this one we bought second hand. You know, all of our equipment is very expensive, which is why when we are using it, we have to cover quite a lot of area with it. You could buy a small house for the price that this combine was, but we have to make that pay by keeping it a long time, making sure it's maintained. But it's just so important, as I said earlier, to have that capacity to harvest our crops when they're needed to. Otherwise, we're not going to get that quality of crop that we need and to get on the supermarket shelves.
And what time of year is harvest?
So harvest time will be for us from the middle of July until the end of August.
And is that for all crops?
Not quite. That's for our cereal crops. All of these peas and beans and oats are in July to August. The other crop we grow on the farm is sugar beet. So we've got quite a nice large field of sugar beet here. We'll just walk across to. So this crop is planted in March, about mid-March. So we prepare the soil. And it's a tiny little seed which is primed, and we'll just see. We plant these seeds spaced apart. They're in rows. You can probably just see that down the row. So they're 50 centimetres apart. And this is harvested starting in sort of September and right through until February, which we don't have that machine. We use a contractor for exactly that reason. We were talking about how expensive the combine was. A sugar beet harvest is even more expensive, and we have a limited area of it, so we use a contractor, somebody that goes around lots of different farms and uses that to make that machine pay. And you can see here we've dug a little hole to show you these sugar beet, and they're planted about 16 centimetres apart, and that's kind of the optimum spacing for those sugar beet to grow. And you can see here, I'll just pull this one out, they're a large tap root, and you can see these other fibrous roots coming off the side here, and these really, you know, that's white fresh growth there, so they're extracting the nutrients from the soil, and you've just got lovely green leaves there harvesting the sunlight. So they're growing pretty well, although they, like lots of crops on the farm, are really dry. I mean, I dug this pit this morning and the soil is just pretty rock hard because these are using the moisture and we just haven't had any. So these sugar beet, by the time they're harvested, what we're looking here is for each sugar beet to be about 1 kilo in weight, and each one of these sugar beet is about 17% sugar. So from 1 kilogram sugar beet, we'll get about 170 grams of sugar, and that gets turned into this stuff, which all silver spoon sugar goes to British Sugar, and is all made from sugar beet, all grown on farms in East Anglia. There's 4 factories, and they produce about, I think, approximately 1.2 to 1.4 million tonnes of sugar a year.
So not all sugar comes from sugar cane?
Not all sugar comes from sugar cane. Some comes from homegrown sugar beet, so without the silver spoon. So it takes approximately 5 to 6 of these sugar beet, once they're fully grown, to make this 1 kilo bag of sugar. Other things about this crop, we do have to make sure we have to try and keep the weeds out, which we can't see any here at the moment, because we want this crop to have sole use of this soil, because if we've got weeds in here, they're taking nutrients, they're taking moisture, and holding this crop back. So that should be what I missed about. Yeah.
You can talk about your beneficial insects.
Yes.
Any ladybirds on?
Oh, yeah, we've got a little bit of beneficial here. It's a rather dull-looking ladybird, but it's one. So in sugar beet, one of the key problems with this crop is we get aphids, and they fly into the crop when the crop's very young. It's actually, now it's got to this stage, not susceptible because they're big enough to deal with it. But when they're very young, these aphids come in and they land on the crop and they feed off the sap in the leaf. But those aphids carry a virus called Beet virus yellows virus. And that can spread across the field, and as those aphids feed on it, they produce young, and that spreads further and further out. The problem with that is it can reduce our yield by 50%, so it's quite important for us to make sure we keep an eye on those aphids and that they're not getting too big on the crop. We've just got a ladybird that was just feeding on that leaf, but he's just knocked them off. So that's what we're looking for. We're looking for these ladybirds that are eating that was another one there, eating any aphids on there. So it's fantastic to see them, and plenty of them in the crop. I think I just touched that leaf, he's down there now. So he'll work his way back onto a leaf. So that's our sugar beet. So we'll have a look at some of the other areas of the farm.
Yeah, let's. A couple of questions. When did you start working on the farm, Tom?
As quite a lot of people in farming backgrounds, probably
About 3
quite a
months
young
old.
age. But I've worked on other farms. I've travelled to Australia and done other bits to see what happens on other farms, and then come back here. And it's all about, I think farms are pretty good actually at sharing information and trying to work together to all improve what we do.
And also, what's your favourite thing about being a farmer?
I love it all. I love the change in the seasons. I mean, you see how excited I get when things start to grow. I think in springtime, when you put all that effort into growing crops and you really see them growing away, it's not quite so exciting when you don't get any rain and you see them kind of dying on their feet, which is quite soul-destroying, but that's just that's part of the job. I don't think you'd be a farmer if you weren't optimistic, so definitely watching this thing as a career in farming, make sure you're optimistic, because you always have to be glass half full, otherwise you'll get quite depressed about it.
We had a question from earlier as well. How much grain do you store on the farm?
So we can store probably 70% of our crops. So we might harvest our winter barley early and sell that straight out of the shed to make space for our wheat and our oats and our beans. So about 1,500 tonnes a year that we would store, and then we would market that through the year to make use of the sheds.
And also, question from your niece: how many fields do you have?
Fields? I'm not sure, but
Feels
our
like a
average
test.
field size is about 8 hectares.
Okay. Not what she asked, but fine.
Yeah. I'll come back on that one. So, as well as the crops, we do have other areas on the farm, and we've seen some really fantastic examples today of the other videos that I've watched of some wildlife areas on the farm. Now, we have just started into a scheme, and I am sort of a little bit embarrassed to show you this, but I thought it's important to note that those margins don't just happen themselves. It's actually quite hard to get those established. So we've left this strip here, and the idea is that creating this habitat for those beneficials that we've just seen in there, the ladybirds and other insects and bugs that might eat some of those nasty predators, nasty bugs in our crop that are going to affect the crop. But we create these areas to encourage more of those to the farm. So here we've planted a wild flower margin, which is a mixture of tusky grasses, sunflowers. I mean, I'm not actually an expert in these flowers, and until they come out on flower I can't necessarily identify them all, but I know in here we've got some flowers and some weeds, which is a little bit disappointing. But we planted this last time we had rain, and then since then we've just had 6 weeks of dry weather. But trust me, I'm a farmer, this will make it, and it will be.
What will it look like?
In a year's time, it's going to look like these pictures.
Are you going to back that up with
I'm going to back that up.
asking people to come?
Please come back next year to Open Farm Sunday, which hopefully will happen in person rather than virtually, to look at that.
You heard it here first. So you said you're not an expert. Do you expert on this? Do you use other experts?
Yeah, so we take advice on that, and we're advised because different flowers are going to be good for different bugs and different beneficial insects. So it's about having a mixture in here to cater for everybody and for all needs. So along here, what we've also got, we planted this new hedge about 4 years ago. I'm actually quite pleased with how that's growing. So it's sort of a wildlife corridor. We've got some other habitat further down there, some trees and some other areas. So this used to be quite an open landscape before, so there was no break in it. Whereas now we've got a lovely corridor here where, insects and birds and wildlife can work their way up and down this. What we will do with this hedge is just keep topping it at the top, and that will help it to branch out at the bottom, so we get a really good base in the bottom of this hedge, which is good for nesting birds and other insects as well. As well as the hedging, we've also planted a couple of hundred trees on the farm this year, which we're hoping to plant more next year. And we've got about another kilometre of hedges going in, but we need to wait until November to plant that, when there's more moisture in the soil, and that will actually take in the ground properly.
So what sort of wildlife do you get on the farm?
We've got loads of wildlife. We've got hares, we've got lots of grey partridges, lots of skylarks, lapwings, yellowhammers. I'm not an expert on all of those, but it's just fantastic to see them around the farm, and hopefully these areas will be creating more and more as well.
And what's your favourite to see?
My favourite? Probably hares, because I enjoy how excited you get about seeing them, but we've got quite a lot of them.
They are good.
But the grey partridges are fantastic to see as well. And as well as these areas, we've got about another 4 hectares of winter bird food mix going in, and that's other crops that are not harvested, but they're a range of different crops that set seed, and then they're there to feed the birds through the winter months, through December, January and February, when there's no other food for them to eat. So we've got a good mix of hopefully profitable arable crops on the farm and some environmental crops as well.
And what trees are you planting, and why?
That was a scheme through the Woodland Trust, and I love planting new trees on the farm. I think it's just fantastic, slightly longer term project, but great to see them growing. So we've got a mixture. We've planted some oak trees, some birch trees, some rowan, and some cherry trees. Excellent. So they're in a shelter belt which we've planted on various areas around the farm.
It sounds like you're doing a really good job of linking environment and farming.
It does, doesn't it?
Perhaps through integrated farm management. Would you say the same?
I would, yeah.
Okay, that's good to hear. Another question, do you have lots of people working on the farm to help?
No, so there's just my father and myself on the farm, and then occasionally a couple of people that come and help at harvest time, just in really busy periods. So other than that, we're trying to do less, as I said earlier, about less cultivation, so actually it doesn't take a huge amount of manpower to farm it. It's just crucial to do things at the right time. So,
wicked.
Yeah. So we really enjoyed showing around the farm, and I've just some of the fantastic farmers that we've seen all day today. And hopefully next year we can actually we can open our gates and show you around properly, and show you a lot more, and have more here for you to see too.
Wicked. Thank you very much, Tom. So I think that summarises today's online Farm Sunday. I actually work with Leaf, so here as well to say a massive thank you to all the farmers that have taken part. I think you'll agree it's been a fabulous alternative to Open Farm Sunday, and I've loved seeing so many farms around the country, 13 farms all around, and seeing what they do. So a massive thank you to the farmers, a massive thank you to the sponsors who've been so supportive of putting it on, which has been really brilliant. There is Open Farm Sunday hopefully on the 20th of September, so look out for a farm near you, and also next June it's going to be back with an absolute bang. So please, stay excited and stay interested in farming. Thanks very much.
Excellent, thank you. See you soon.
Bye.
Time for a beer.